Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a bit of an information architecture look at something that sounds really simple, but maybe isn't. That phrase is, tell me about yourself. Just 6 words, right? But it's the launch pad for almost every new social or professional interaction you'll ever have. And our source material today is really quite interesting because it spends a lot of time on this specific prompt. It's from excerpts of a resource called Podcast, Tell Me About Yourself, and it's specifically made for English learners.
Right. And that context is, I think, absolutely crucial. I mean, when you look at a resource built for efficiency for learners trying to get fluent fast, if they're dedicating a whole module, a whole section just to this one question, that tells you something. It signals its critical function.
So it's not just small talk.
No, not at all. It's more like a gateway skill. So our mission today really is to dig into why this seemingly open-ended question is actually such a foundational challenge for communicating effectively in English. We're going to unpack, the essential skills hiding in there, things like prioritizing parts of your identity, being concise with language, all wrapped up in mastering that one answer.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that.
Yeah.
Why this specific question? I mean, tell me about yourself. Why make that the focus of a whole learning module? You'd think maybe, I don't know, verb tenses or negotiating skills might seem more practical. Why is this identity statement such a bottleneck?
Well, you said it earlier, is the entry point. But maybe more importantly, it hits the learner's biggest challenge head on, cognitive overload, especially under pressure.
Cognitive overload. Explain that a bit.
Okay, so imagine you're the learner. Someone asks this big open question. Suddenly, you're trying to do like 5 things at once. You're searching your entire life story. You're translating bits of it into English in your head, picking the right words, the right grammar, and trying to figure out if the other person is even interested.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds completely exhausting, like running a whole language processing center in your brain while trying to edit your life down to 30 seconds.
Exactly. And the resource, the English Learning Podcast, it understands this. It knows that if the learner stumbles right there at that first hurdle, if they hesitate or panic or just ramble on, well, that damages their confidence for the whole rest of the conversation.
Ah, so the resource isn't just handing them lines to memorize.
Not just that. It's giving them a structure, a kind of anchor, you could say. It's teaching them how to pre-plan, maybe even pre-choreograph, arguably the most high-stakes 60 seconds of any new interaction.
That's interesting. So the solution isn't necessarily better grammar per se, but better organization, like treating the answer as a mini presentation you've already prepared.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If you have that initial structure solid, locked down, then the follow-up questions that come after become, much easier to handle.
It changes the whole dynamic.
Instantly. The learner shifts from, passively reacting, maybe fearfully, to this big unknown question, to actively executing a planned, concise introduction. And that shift from passive participant to active communicator. That's really the goal. That's the measure of fluency this resource is aiming for.
Okay, but here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. Because even for native speakers, honestly, this question can be tricky.
Oh, absolutely.
But for the learner, there's another layer, right? It's not just what to say, it's figuring out the cultural expectations. What kind of self are you supposed to present?
Exactly. And the resource, just by choosing this phrase to focus on, forces the learner to immediately practice what we call contextual relevance. You touch on it, do you talk about your hobbies, your family background, your biggest life challenges? The answer, it always depends on the situation, the environment.
Right.
The resource is basically teaching. Your identity statement has to serve the current interaction.
So, okay, let's say I'm at a very formal professional networking event.
Yeah.
And I launch into a 45-second story about my amazing cat. Even if my English is perfect, I've kind of failed the relevance test, haven't I?
You've wasted your linguistic economy. Yes, that's a good way to put it. The resource implicitly guides the learner to filter their life story through, let's say, 3 essential lives. We can maybe call them the 3 C's, okay?
Yeah.
Drawn from what you need to answer. Tell me about yourself. First, C, context or origin. This is the basic orientation. Where you're from, maybe where you live now. It just sets the scene.
Groundwork.
Exactly. And for the English learner, the advice here is usually keep it short. 1, maybe 2 punchy sentences. Geography, background, that's it.
Okay, so not my entire residential history since birth. More like, I grew up in Toronto, but I moved to London 2 years ago to work in finance. Something like that grounds the listener quickly.
Perfect. That's the idea. Necessary geographical context, but 0 biographical overload. If the resource works, The learner knows this origin bit shouldn't be more than, say, 15% of their answer.
Got it. What's the second C?
The second component, and this is often the big one, especially in professional or academic settings in English-speaking cultures, is the core role or activity. This is about what you do. What's your current utility or purpose? Your job title, your area of study, maybe the main project you're focused on.
And you're saying this part should often lead the answer in a professional context?
Typically, yes. That's the advice.
But wait, couldn't that feel a bit abrupt or transactional? Like if I'm just meeting someone casually, maybe I should start with something warmer, like a shared interest or something.
That's a really good point, and it highlights that slight tension, right, between cultural nuances and the need for clear structure, especially for a learner. The learning resource usually advises leading with a role because, particularly in, let's say, Anglo-American professional culture, stating your function up front, I'm a graphic designer, I'm studying marine biology, it signals seriousness pretty quickly.
Okay.
It establishes a clear track for the conversation, it avoids that awkward pause, and gives the listener a solid label they can immediately grab onto and ask about.
Ah, okay. So the resource is teaching that, initially at least, structure kind of favors clarity over maybe casual warmth. Set the functional scene first, like handing over a verbal business card.
Exactly like that. And the tactical advice here is usually use strong, clear nouns and verbs. Be direct. Don't say, well, I'm sort of involved in marketing.
Right.
Say, I manage the social media strategy for a tech startup. Be specific. This part is often the main chunk of the response.
Okay, origin, role. What the third C?
The third one is the connection or motivation. Now, this one is often more implied than stated directly, but the learner needs to be aware of it so they can tailor their answer effectively. It's basically the why. Why are you here in this specific conversation right now? Are you looking for information, networking for a job, just practicing your English, hoping to find collaborators?
This feels like the trickiest one, because the real reason might be a bit too blunt. Like, if I'm at a careers fair, my motivation is obviously I need a job, but just saying that feels wrong.
Right.
So the resource must be teaching them how to phrase that motivation more indirectly, strategically.
That's exactly where it moves beyond just language practice into, well, strategic communication. The resource generally encourages phrasing the motivation as a goal or a point of interest, rather than just a raw need. So instead of, I need work, you connect your role to a purpose. Something like, I'm a data analyst specializing in healthcare trends. That's the role. And I'm here today hoping to connect with people working on predictive diagnostics to learn more about the latest challenges. That's the connection motivation.
That reframing is really smart. It takes what could feel like a vulnerable moment, this big open question, and turns it into a chance to actually direct the conversation. So the learner uses the structured three-part answer to basically plant conversational seeds. They're subtly choosing the topics for the next few minutes.
Yes, exactly. They're leading the conversation in a way. Yeah. They mentioned living in Seattle, origin, and working in software engineering role. They've essentially put up signposts suggesting the next topics could be about tech or Seattle life or work challenges.
You set the agenda.
They set the agenda, define the boundaries, and importantly, they steer the conversation towards areas where they feel most confident speaking.
You know, I think the biggest takeaway here, maybe especially for our listeners who are likely fluent speakers, not necessarily learners,
Right.
is realizing how this resource distills really quite advanced communication strategy down into what looks like a basic language lesson. That concept you mentioned, the linguistic economy.
Yes, linguistic economy.
Yeah.
It's something that, frankly, even many native speakers aren't great at. We often ramble, maybe because we can. We rely on our fluency to kind of smooth over the fact that we haven't actually structured our thoughts.
But the learner can't do that.
They can't.
Yeah.
They're operating with less bandwidth, cognitively speaking. So they have to be economical. They're forced to boil down their identity, their purpose, into just 2 or 3 really impactful sentences.
And that exercise forces a realization, doesn't it, that in many high-stakes situations, being brief isn't just, polite. It's strategically vital.
It really is. If you can't summarize who you are and why you're relevant in that moment concisely, it signals a lack of clarity, maybe even a lack of preparedness. And that's true, regardless of the language you're speaking.
It's like the resource implicitly teaches that, in modern communication anyway, your personal history is kind of secondary until the listener gets your current function. Utility first.
Utility and relevance, absolutely. That's a fascinating cultural insight sort of baked into this simple language task.
So, okay, what does this mean for the fluent speaker listening now? How can we apply this? Should we be thinking about our own tell me about yourself moments, maybe on a LinkedIn summary? Or walking into a meeting not just as casual chat, but as these structured three-part identity statements?
I think absolutely. The lessons that the English learner has to master here are incredibly relevant for, say, executive communication or any professional setting. Think about it. If you're in a pitch meeting or introducing yourself to a new team, that ability to succinctly state your origin, the context or background you bring, your role, your specific expertise or function, and your motivation, why you're speaking now, what the goal is, that directly impacts your perceived credibility. It's basically structured self-advocacy.
So the fact that a whole learning resource is dedicated to this phrase, it really elevates tell me about yourself. It's not just an opening gambit, it's more like a fundamental test.
A
Sure.
litmus test,
Yeah.
exactly. A test of whether the speaker understands the sort of unwritten rules, the social contracts of communication, particularly in English-speaking professional contexts.
Hmm.
What they're teaching is that structure, clear, concise structure is the engine that drives confidence and connection in those crucial first moments.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we've seen how this seemingly simple prompt, tell me about yourself, is actually a really powerful training exercise for English learners. It forces them to practice prioritization, structured thinking, making themselves immediately relevant. It shows that the best answers are more like carefully edited elevator pitches than, rambling life stories.
And that structure confirms a wider principle, I think, that moving successfully from being an unknown quantity to being seen as a credible participant really hinges on offering these structured, concise identity statements, ones that respect the listener's time and attention and effectively guide the conversation forward.
So we'll leave you, our listener, with a final thought to maybe mull over. If you applied that three-component structure, origin, role, motivation to the last time you had to introduce yourself in a high-stakes situation, would you have cut anything out? Would you have been more concise? And thinking about it now, if you only had, say, 60 seconds to define your professional identity, is your current go-to answer just a statement, or is it actually a compelling invitation for a deeper conversation? It's something to think about.
Definitely. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you next time.